Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, a truly monumental event, the French Revolution.
Absolutely. It's hard to overstate its impact.
And our mission, really, is to explore how ideas we often take for granted, liberty, freedom, equality, were forged in, let's say, the chaotic furnace of late 18th century France.
Exactly. We're tracing that huge shift, from the old regime, a society built on privilege you were born with, to this radical, often quite violent experiment in modern government.
An experiment defined, really, by the Declaration of the Rights of Man.
That's the core document.
So let's jump right in. Picture this. It's the morning of July 14th, 1789. Paris is absolutely electric.
Tense doesn't even begin to cover it.
Troops are moving in, rumors are flying that the king's about to order them to fire on the citizens.
Total panic. And you see people, thousands of them, gathering, trying to form some kind of people's militia. They're desperate for weapons.
Yeah, this isn't some organized protest march. This is sheer terror driving people to self-defense.
It really was like a collective breakdown, but one that had been brewing for a long, long time. To understand that July explosion, you really have to dig into the mess Louis XVI inherited, especially the finances.
Right, let's unpack that royal financial disaster. Louis VI comes to the throne in 1774, opens the books, and oops, treasury's empty.
Completely bare. And why? Well, years and years of war, for one.
Yeah.
Maintaining that incredibly extravagant court at Versailles. That wasn't cheap.
And the big one, backing the American colonies against Britain.
That was the killer blow, financially speaking. Added over $1 billion livres to the debt.
$1 billion, on top of what was already there.
Which was already over $2 billion. So we're talking colossal sums. But here's the kicker. The interest rate lenders were charging.
Go on.
10%.
10%. So the government's just drowning in interest payments.
Exactly. A massive chunk of the national budget just goes to servicing the debt, not actually, running the country, paying the army, courts, officials.
So the only option left is raise taxes.
That's what they needed to do. But the system itself, the whole structure of society, made that almost impossible. It was fundamentally unfair.
And that brings us to the old regime itself, this society of estates.
Right. French society was rigidly divided. Think feudal system leftovers, 3 estates.
First estate,
Yeah.
clergy, second estate, nobility.
And crucially, both enjoyed huge privileges just by being born into that estate. The biggest one, they paid basically no state taxes.
So all the tax burden falls on
Everyone else.
the third estate, which was like 90% of the population. Peasants, artisans, merchants, lawyers, everyone.
And peasants were the vast majority of that group. They might own tiny plots, but most land, maybe 60%, belonged to nobles, the church, or the richer members of the third estate itself.
Think about what a peasant owed. Feudal dues to the local lord just for using the land.
Right.
Then tithes, usually 1/10 of their crops to the church. And then direct taxes to the state, like the tail, plus indirect taxes on essentials, salt, tobacco. It was relentless. They're funding the whole show multiple times over. It's unsustainable.
And then pile on top of that what historians call a subsistence crisis.
Meaning?
The population had boomed. Went from about 23 million in 1715 to 28 million by 1789. More mouths to feed.
But food production didn't keep up.
Not even close. So the price of bread, the absolute staple food for most people, just shot up.
Well, wages stayed low.
Exactly. Wages for most workers didn't budge. So the gap between rich and poor became a chasm. Add a bad harvest, maybe drought or hail.
And suddenly people are literally starving. It's not just unfair, it's life or death.
Precisely.
Now, a system this broken doesn't just collapse on its own. It needs, well, ideas. A justification for change.
And that's where the rising middle class within the third estate comes in. Merchants, manufacturers, lawyers, officials. They were educated, often prosperous.
And they had this radical idea. Your place in society should depend on merit and what you achieve, not who your father was.
They were reading the Enlightenment philosophers, people like John Locke, who'd already argued against the divine right of kings.
And Jean-Jacques Rousseau, huge influence.
Absolutely. His idea of the social contract that government needs, the consent of the governed,
Yeah.
and his push for democracy. One person, one vote.
Plus Montesquieu, giving them the practical model.
Right. The separation of powers. Legislative, executive, judiciary. Don't put all the power in one place.
And this wasn't just academic theory, was it? These ideas were spreading.
Oh, yeah. Discussed in salons, coffee houses, pamphlets, read aloud in public squares for those who couldn't read. It offered a real alternative, and they had a living example.
The American Constitution, proof that it could work.
So the king's financial desperation forces his hand. he needs new taxes.
Which means calling the Estates General, May 5th, 1789, first time they'd met since 1614.
A huge moment. But the procedure itself became the battleground.
How so?
The old way was voting by estate, one vote for the clergy, one for the nobility, one for the third estate.
So the two privileged estates could always outvote the third, 2-1, even though the third represented almost everyone.
Right. So the third estate representatives show up demanding change. They want voting by head. Individual votes. They had 600 reps versus 300 each for the other two.
Rousseau's idea, democratic principle.
Exactly. But Louis VI refused. Stick to the old ways.
So the third estate walked out.
They did. Declared themselves the true representatives of the French nation.
And that leads to one of the most iconic moments, June 20th.
They find themselves locked out of their usual meeting hall, so they troop over to a nearby indoor tennis court.
And swear the tennis court oath.
Pledging not to disband until they'd written a constitution for France, one that limited the king's power. They declared themselves the National Assembly. It was an incredible act of defiance, claiming sovereignty for the people.
While they're drafting constitutions, things are exploding in Paris.
Yes, back to July 14th, the storming of the Bastille.
Was it really about freeing prisoners?
Not primarily. There were only 7 prisoners inside, actually. It was much more symbolic.
How
The Bastille Fortress prison was seen as the ultimate symbol of the king's absolute arbitrary power. Hated. So storming it, tearing it down.
It was like dismantling the old system itself. I read they sold fragments of the stone as souvenirs.
They did. People understood the significance.
Yeah.
And the unrest wasn't just in Paris.
It spread to the countryside.
Massively.
Yeah.
This period called the Great Fear. Rumors flew completely unfounded, mostly that nobles were hiring gangs of thugs to destroy peasant crops.
So the peasants panicked and fought back?
Exactly. They attacked manor houses, chateaux, looted and stored grain, and crucially burned the documents that listed all the feudal dues they owed, wiping the slate clean.
Wow. So the whole country's in revolt. What does the king do?
He basically has to fold. He formally recognized the National Assembly.
And the assembly acts
Fast, incredibly fast. On the night of August 4th, 1789, in a single session, they abolished the entire feudal system. Obligations, taxes, privileges, gone. The clergy gave up their tithes and privileges. Church lands were confiscated by the state.
The entire structure of the old regime just dissolved.
In one night, it paved the way for creating something entirely new.
Which led to the Constitution of 1791. France becomes a constitutional monarchy.
Yes, limiting the king's power, setting up that separation of powers, legislature, executive, judiciary, just like Montesquieu suggested.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
There is. Alongside the Constitution came the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. Amazing document on paper.
Declaring rights like liberty, property, security, resistance to oppression, equality before the law. Sounds great.
Foundational stuff.
Yeah.
Natural, inalienable rights.
Yeah.
But who got these rights in practice?
Ah, not everyone.
No. The Constitution divided citizens into active and passive. Only active citizens could vote.
And who were they?
Men over 25 who paid a certain amount in taxes, roughly equivalent to 3 days' wages for a laborer.
So property owners, essentially. How many people did that cover?
About 4 million out of a population of 28 million.
So the vast majority, including all women, were passive citizens. No vote, no political voice.
Exactly. The old system of birth privilege was basically replaced by a new system of wealth privilege.
And people noticed this contradiction immediately.
Oh, absolutely. Critics, like the radical journalist Jean-Paul Marat, jumped on it. He pointed out, look, you've just given representation to the rich. Wealth still dictates the law. And he warned, the poor and disenfranchised won't put up with this new aristocracy of money forever.
A pretty accurate prediction, as it turned out.
Completely. Things got even more radical. The king was suspected, rightly, of plotting with foreign powers, hoping they'd invade and restore his absolute rule.
Which led to war.
Yes, France declared war on Prussia and Austria in April 1792. This became a fight for the survival of the revolution itself. Patriotism surged. The Marseillaise, now the national anthem, comes from this period.
And the political mood shifted again.
Dramatically. Power gravitated towards the more radical political clubs, especially the Jacobins, led by Maximilien Robespierre.
Their members were known as the sans-culottes.
All right, literally without knee breeches. They wore long striped trousers, rejecting the fashion of the nobility. They represented the working people of Paris, the artisans, shopkeepers.
And they weren't messing around.
No. In August 1792, they organized an uprising, stormed the royal palace, and imprisoned the king. New elections were called.
And this time, the voting rights changed.
Crucially, yes, all men aged 21 and over got the vote, regardless of wealth. A huge step towards democracy.
So this new assembly, the convention, what was its first act?
September 21st, 1792. Abolished the monarchy. Declared France a republic.
And the king.
Louis VI was tried for treason and executed by guillotine in January 1793. No turning back now. And this is where we enter the most intense and arguably most terrifying phase. The Reign of Terror. 1793 to 1794.
Led by Robespierre and the Jacobins.
Yes, there was a policy of, well, severe control and punishment. Anyone considered an enemy of the Republic, nobles, clergy, members of other political factions, even Jacobins who seemed too moderate could be arrested, tried quickly, and executed.
The guillotine became the grim symbol of this era.
It did. But Robespierre saw it differently. He wasn't just eliminating opponents, he was trying to enforce a vision of radical equality through state power.
How did that manifest in daily life?
Maximum prices were set for wages and essential goods like grain. Rationing was introduced. Peasants were forced to sell grain at fixed prices.
Even bread became political?
Yes, everyone had to eat the pain d'égalité quality bread, made from whole wheat. White flour bread was seen as aristocratic. Churches were closed, sometimes converted into barracks or offices. Even how you address people changed.
No more monsieur, madame.
Nope. Everyone was citoyen or citoyenne, citizen, enforcing equality in every interaction.
It's fascinating and chilling. How do they justify this level of control, this violence?
That's the crucial question. You had people like Camille Desmoulins defining liberty as happiness, reason, equality, justice. Beautiful ideals.
But then Robespierre comes along.
And he argues that terror is necessary to achieve that liberty. He famously said terror is nothing but justice, prompt, severe, inflexible. He believed it was an emanation of virtue, that the Republic could only survive if its enemies were ruthlessly crushed.
Virtue through terror. It's a stark concept.
And he pursued it relentlessly. He started turning on his own allies, accusing them of lacking revolutionary fervor. Eventually, even his supporters felt he'd gone too far.
So the terror consumed itself.
In a way, yes. Demands for moderation grew, even within the convention. Robespierre was arrested in July 1794 and, ironically, executed by the guillotine himself. The Reign of Terror ended.
So, with the Jacobins gone, who takes over?
The pendulum swung back. The wealthier middle classes regained control. They drafted another new constitution.
And this one.
Restricted voting rights again. Back to property qualifications. Power was placed in the hands of a five-man executive body called the Directory.
Why five?
To try and prevent power concentrating in one person's hands, like it had with Robespierre. They were terrified of dictatorship.
Did it work? Prevent instability?
Not really. The Directory was constantly squabbling with the legislative councils. Political instability continued. And this created a power vacuum.
Which is perfect for
a military strongman. The situation practically begged for someone to come in and restore order. And that someone was Napoleon Bonaparte.
A general becomes the leader.
Exactly. Through political maneuvering and military might, he eventually overthrew the Directory, and in 1804 he crowned himself Emperor of France.
So from absolute king through revolution, republic, terror, back to an emperor. Quite a ride.
A turbulent couple of decades, to say the least. Napoleon did bring stability, and he implemented major reforms protecting private property, standardizing weights and measures with the decimal system, modernized things.
But his ambitions grew beyond France.
Massively. His armies marched across Europe. Initially, some saw them as liberators, spreading revolutionary ideals, overthrowing old monarchies. But soon they were seen mostly as invaders, imposing French rule.
Until his final defeat.
At Waterloo in 1815, ending that chapter.
But throughout all this upheaval, the terror, Napoleon, the ideals of the revolution didn't just vanish. People kept fighting for them, especially women, right?
Absolutely. Women were incredibly active from the very start. Think of the Women's March on Versailles back in 1789, demanding bread and forcing the king back to Paris.
Yet they were consistently sidelined, made passive citizens.
They were, but they didn't accept it passively. They formed their own political clubs. The Society of Revolutionary and Republican Women was a famous one. They demanded the right to vote, to hold political office.
And figures like Olympe de Gouges?
A playwright and activist, she wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and Citizen in 1791, directly challenging the male-only version. She basically asked, if women have the right to mount the scaffold, shouldn't they also have the right to mount the speaker's rostrum?
Powerful point. What happened to her?
The Jacobins, for all their talk of equality, executed her for treason during the Terror. They saw independent women's political action as a threat.
So even the most radical phase had its limits. Were there any gains for women?
Some early on. Laws were passed allowing divorce, creating state schools for girls. But the political clubs were shut down during the Terror. And the right to vote
Took a little longer.
until 1946 in France. A very long delay on that promise of equality.
Another huge contradiction was slavery.
A massive one.
Mm.
The French colonial economy, especially in the Caribbean places like Saint-Domingue, modern Haiti, ran on enslaved labor. Sugar, coffee, indigo plantations. It was fueled by the brutal triangular trade.
Did the Declaration of the Rights of Man apply to enslaved people?
Well, that was the debate. Initially, the National Assembly hesitated. Many members had vested interest in the colonial trade and the ports. They feared upsetting the powerful planter lobby.
So liberty for some, but not all.
It took until 1794, under the Radical Convention, for slavery to be abolished in all French colonies. A major victory.
But it didn't last.
No. Napoleon reintroduced it in 1802, partly to appease the planters and try to regain control of Haiti, which had declared independence. Shows you how economic interests could override revolutionary ideals.
When was it finally abolished for good?
Not until 1848. Another long struggle.
Okay, so stepping back from the chaos, the contradictions, the violence, what's the lasting legacy of this whole period, 1789 to 1815?
It's profound, even with all the setbacks. The most important legacy, undoubtedly, is the ideas themselves. Liberty, equality, democratic rights. They didn't achieve them perfectly or even stably in France itself for a long time.
But the concepts were out there.
Exactly. They spread like wildfire across Europe and eventually the world. Feudalism was dismantled in many countries, partly because of the French example.
And it inspired movements far beyond Europe.
Definitely. Anti-colonial movements drew inspiration from it. You see figures like Tipu Sultan in India or later Raja Ramohan Roy engaging with these ideas of freedom and popular sovereignty and adapting them to their own struggles against colonial rule.
Ramohan Roy even visited French ships flying the revolutionary flag.
Yes, in the 1830s, during another wave of revolution in France. He was deeply inspired. The idea that individuals have rights, that nations should rule themselves, that became a global touchstone.
So the arc is just incredible, from absolute monarchy buried in debt to this explosion of rights and hopes.
Then into the extreme violence of the Terror, trying to enforce those rights.
And out the other side with the military emperor, it's a dizzying cycle.
And it brings us back to that core tension we saw earlier, the clash between defining liberty as, happiness, reason, equality, justice.
And Robespierre's justification of terror as justice, swift, severe, and flexible, the necessary tool to achieve that liberty.
Two fundamentally different views on how you create a better world and what means are justified.
The revolution undeniably established principles of individual rights that underpin modern democracy. But the terror is this stark warning, isn't it, about the dangers of trying to impose radical equality through absolute state power.
It absolutely is. And that tension, how much state force is acceptable or even necessary to secure rights and create a just society, that's a debate that hasn't gone away. It's still right at the heart of politics today.
So the question we leave you with is this. Looking at the reign of terror, what does it suggest about the price, perhaps the human cost, of pursuing absolute equality? Is such a goal achievable without such measures, or is the pursuit itself inherently dangerous?
Something to think about.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.